Hey everyone, this is David Pike, the Motorcity Mechanic, and I'm back with another video. Now today we're going to be talking about two things. One of them is the Recall S85, and the other is how to remove the upper intake on a 2006 and newer Jeep Grand Cherokee and Dodge Durango with a 3.6 liter with EGR valve. Check it out. So a little quick background on what the Recall S85 pertains to. Now, it affects a total of around 30,000 vehicles. They are of the year 2016, and those are the Jeep Grand Cherokees and Dodge Durangos, both equipped with the 3.6 liter Pentastar V6 engine. They had to be built between February and April of 2016 for this recall to apply to them. Now what happened was there was a possibility of some damage occurring during the assembly of the engine at the manufacturer, and that damage is what we're going to be inspecting for. Now the main thing we're going to be discussing in this video is the actual inspection process for the S85 Recall. We're not going to go into any kind of repairs if we do find damage. We're mainly going to stick to what is needed when you bring the vehicle to the dealership and what the technician has to do in order to gain access to that fuel crossover tube to see if there's any damage. And mainly it's the removal of the upper intake assembly. And that's where we're going to start. We're going to go ahead and work on removing that plastic cover on top of the engine. Now the first step in this process is we need to get this upper plastic beauty cover off of the engine. Now in the previous 3.6 you would just pick it up. Not in this case. What we've got to do is we've got to open up this flap right here that gives us access to the oil filter. And what we're going to find out is that there's one fastener, a 10 millimeter we need to take loose. So go ahead and lift up on the flap, pick it up, and right here in this location we've got a 10 millimeter we're going to take off. So now we've got that fastener off, all we got to do now is work on picking up on that plastic cover. Now there's a total of 4 rubber bushings, one in each corner, and those go on plastic mounts. We've got to release those. So depending on how long it's been on there, it may be easy, it may be hard. It's just a matter of lifting straight up, and work your way around the perimeter. The back ones usually are the hardest. Now we can set this off to the side. Now the next step is we need to remove this plastic inlet assembly that goes from the air filter over to the throttle body. We do have some wiring harnesses that are attached in at least one place, and we also got a sensor we got to disconnect. We got a hose back there that goes to the crankcase. So we got a few things that we will be releasing in order to get this assembly off. Now I'm going to be leaving the upper air filter assembly on it. I'm just going to take the hose loose that goes to the crankcase, and then we're going to start working on releasing everything else. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and unlatch the upper cover for the air filter box. Now what I like to get those hoses off with is usually a long pair of needle nose pliers. I can use them sometimes to help break the hose loose in case it's been on there for a while, and I also can use it to help pry it off, just like we did in this case. This hose came out fairly easy because it's a fairly new vehicle. But when you go back with it, put a little smear of grease right here on the nipple on the upper housing. That way it just slides back on. That way you don't have to fight with it. Now what we're going to do now is release the 2 metal clips that fasten the upper housing to the lower housing of the air filter box. You can use your fingers for this. You don't need no special tools. They're right here on the left side of the box. And what we're going to do is now it's released, we're going to pick up slightly that angle. We're going to come out towards the fender and then pick up, because there's a couple fingers on the right side of the box that everything goes down into. And now that's been taken loose. Now the clamp that they use to hold the plastic inlet to the throttle body uses nothing more than either an 8 millimeter if you've got it, or a flat tip screwdriver. Either one will work fine, just use that to back it off. And now we've got a connector for the intake air temp sensor that we've got to disconnect. Now the intake air temp sensor has 2 locks on it to keep it in place. The first one's a red one. And on the red one we're going to pry it upward. I'm using nothing more than a pocket screwdriver. Now that that's released, right below it we have a piece that we need to push in on and release it. So there's 2 locks to keep it in place. Now that harness that I mentioned that's routed and attached to the plastic inlet assembly is right here just below that air intake temp sensor. All we're going to do is use our metal trim stick tools, get up under the little plastic tree type fastener that holds it there, and pry it upward. At this point everything's been taken loose from this plastic inlet. Now we got 2 more rubber bushings going on plastic studs, just like we did with the upper beauty cover. We got one at the back cover on the left side valve cover back here, and we also got one just below the throttle body. All you got to do is lift up from the back side here to release it, and then we'll do the same thing over here as we're going up with the assembly. And now we just work it off and out of the way. So some of the obvious difference between this generation 3.6 and the previous is the way the upper intake is routed, positioned, and mounted. We don't have brackets going over the driver's side or left side head like we did before. The intake also doesn't cover that up. Everything is mainly on the passenger side or the right side. That includes the brackets along the side, and we got brackets along the front that we're going to be dealing with. And another thing that's been added to this is actually an EGR valve. And the EGR valve is actually mounted on the intake as a rubber hose that goes further down to the cooler, and we'll have to be dealing with that when we go to remove everything. So now we're going to move on to getting the EVAP purge solenoid removed from the upper intake where it fastens and its related hoses. Now we're going to use my long needle nose pliers like I did earlier and get up here right behind the throttle body. We've got one hose we'll lift up, and now we can actually grab the assembly and work it up. It just slides down onto a finger on top of that intake. Now we do sit it over there, and then we've got a harness on the back side we need to pull loose. And now we've got it removed from the upper intake. Now we'll move over to this hose right here. It's a plastic hose that runs over to the right side valve cover, and it's got a quick release on it. So in order to release the lock on that plastic hose, we need to push down on that quick connect. You can use anything flat, it could be a pocket screwdriver like this, push down and then pull off. Now it also is routed on the side of the intake here, so as we pull it off, we'll unsnap it from the intake. As it goes down the length of it, we'll move it to the side as well, just like we did with that purge solenoid. Now we're going to be dealing with this main wiring harness right here. It attaches to the upper intake, just like the rest of the harnesses would, with little plastic fasteners that push down, much like Christmas tree fasteners. We got a couple things we'll be disconnecting. We've got our map sensor up here that has a 2-stage lock, and on the electronic throttle body we've got a lock on it as well for the connector, and that's a 2-stage lock. So we'll go ahead and release both of those, and then we'll start getting this harness off so that we can get more access to the intake. So on that electronic throttle body, just push on the red lock until it's fully released, and push in to slide the connector off. Now the harness back here just snaps onto the actual throttle body, a metal tab. So now we got that released. Now we'll move over to the map sensor. As you've already seen on the other connectors that have that red lock, what you're going to do is you're going to pull back towards where the wires are, and then you're going to squeeze down and slide it off. Nothing's any different about this versus the electronic throttle body or earlier on the air intake temp sensor. Not only does the harness use plastic fasteners to keep it down, but that mounting stud right there, that was for one of the rubber bushings for that beauty cover that went on top of the engine. That has to be taken off. And that can be backed off with your little 10mm wrench. And that actually fastens the harness right there to the top of the intake. So now we'll work on getting the plastic fasteners released so we can get it off and out of the way. We're using our metal panel fastener remover just like always. Get up under here the best you can. Get it off. That's one of the fasteners right there. Now we'll work on down to the other end.